discussion of the food security law in India was a long journey, and I guess that during this long process, many themes and issues were discussed. It's not that we start saying we have to draft a law. Also, it's a discussion about the scope of the law and all the different issues that you have to resolve. How was the process?
I think the Indian experience has demonstrated, that it's not enough to say, put it into a constitution or put it into a law or a court ruling, that everybody has the right to food. That's a starting point. But the unpacking of that idea into something that is really operational requires answering many different questions, and I'll illustrate some of them. In India, they unfolded through a very long journey from, a court case from 2001, which is still continuing, a right to food campaign, the Prime Minister's National Advisory Council, Parliament, public discussions, newspapers, television, academic debates. All of these unfolded, these debates unfolded through in these many different forums. The first debate, of course, is whether the state should have the duty to provision food to its hungry people, or whether markets in themselves are sufficient for people. I mean, if markets function, people have jobs. Why should the state provision food? That's one kind of debate that we have as a starting point. Then suppose one assumes that the state should have this duty. Then you move into other questions. You move into the question of whether this duty should be written into law, or should it be something that is left to executive discretion, from budget to budget, government to government. They can make their choices. That is a second question. A third is that should this right apply to all people? Should it be universal? Should it be targeted to specific populations? Here again, there are people on principle who believe that food is a social and economic basic right for survival, and the state should guarantee it to all households, and if you don't need it, you'll just opt out. But there are people who believe also that no, resources are limited, food is limited, so you should target it only on people really in need. Then there are practical questions, of course, whether if you have to target, what yardsticks will we use, and a lot of the experience from India and the rest of the world shows that people who are really poor tend to not be recognized in large numbers. There are great exclusion errors in selection. There's also the question of whether everybody living within a country should be covered or only citizens. You have a lot of undocumented migrants in a country like India, and what about them? Or people who may not be migrants but have no documents to prove their citizenship. Otherwise, you leave the most vulnerable out. Then there are questions about whether this assistance should be given in cash or in food kind.
Okay.
And here the debate is a little complex because some kind of provision has to be in cash. So if you're giving a pension to old people or maternity benefits, they are in cash. But the debate is also about a public distribution system or school meals. Should you instead give cash to people because there's a belief that there'll be less corruption? But there's an alternative view that cash in the hands of a family is controlled culturally by men who may not spend it on food, whereas food directly in kind transferred to a household, women control the decisions and it's more likely to end up as food. So that's another kind of debate. Then the debates around the right to food of vulnerable children. So a child is in school, gets a school meal. What about a child who is in work, unable to go into child labor, not able to go into school, or doesn't have a family, is on the streets? So taking care of the rights of children outside school. Also, there are lots of discussions about the first 1,000 days of life and where a child is most nutritionally vulnerable, and what are the measures, because you can't have direct food transfers for children of that age, and how do you make sure of the nutrition, breastfeeding, how do you ensure that a woman is able to breastfeed her child, creches, and so on and so forth. There's also very important discussions about a gender just food security law. And on one thing that in India we got a good consensus on was to recognize the head of the family in the context of right to food law to be the woman. So it's the oldest woman on whose name the ration card and the other entitlements are transferred. But there are other problems, because a woman is normally, nutrition schemes target women in their reproductive role, as future mothers, as existing mothers. It's as if the woman doesn't have a right to own nutrition for her own sake, but for the sake of the child. So women who are outside a reproductive cycle, women who are older or women who are single, so one has to look at women's rights as absolute in themselves, and that throws up challenges of different kinds. There are big discussions about vulnerable groups and starvation, who are most vulnerable to starvation. So destitute populations, homeless populations, single migrants who come into the city. And there we need to look at things like soup kitchens, destitute feeding programs, etc., as being part of an overall framework of law. There's one very fundamental question as well, is that this is only talking about entitlements to food in terms of what the state has to give as food, but the causes of hunger, things like farmers' rights, food sovereignty issues, water sanitation, which are critical for absorption, gender equality, caste, decent work. All of these also are major contributors to hunger or nourishment. And should they all be part of the law? So there are some people who believe that the law should contain all of these protections, where some say it will become too heavy to be able to manage and implement a law with so many diverse entitlements. And finally, the debates around the enforcement system. And it's not enough to give you a right, which is a legal right, if you don't have an independent system of enforcement. So who will enforce my right? Do I go back to the same administration? Do I go to the local government? Do I go to a judge? Or do we have some kind of an ombudsperson who is appointed from the citizens? But then if you have an ombudsperson, how do you ensure that that person is actually independent? And how do you make sure that that person is accountable? So as you can see, and this is just a sort of very quick bird's eye view of the range of debates and choices that a country needs to make when it tries to draft a right.